Welcome to Strip Cover, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Andrew Fort, and we are here for another entry into our opening paragraphs playlist here on the channel. But today's video will not be from a novel, but instead a short story. One of Ernest Hemingway's short stories. The short story in question is titled Hills Like White Elephants, one of Papa's most famous short stories. One of the shortest and most directest to the pointestest short stories that Hemingway left us. And the opening paragraph reads as such. The hills across the valley of the Ebro were long and white. On this side there was no shade and no trees, and the station was between two lines of rails in the sun. Close against the side of the station there was a warm shadow of the building, and a curtain made of strings of bamboo beads hung across the door into the bar to keep flies out. The American and the girl with him sat at a table in the shade outside the building. It was very hot, and the express from Barcelona would come in 40 minutes. It stopped at this junction for 2 minutes and then went on to Madrid. I'm going to read it one more time just to have a little more depth with the words here. The hills across the valley of the Ebro were long and white. On this side there was no shade and no trees, and the station was between the two lines of rails in the sun. Close against the side of the station there was the warm shadow of the building, and a curtain made of strings of bamboo beads hung across the open door into the bar to keep flies out. The American and the girl with him sat at the table in the shade outside the building. It was very hot, and the express from Barcelona would come in 40 minutes. It stopped at this junction for 2 minutes and went on to Madrid. So what do we have here? What's going on in this paragraph, the opening paragraph to Hills Like White Elephants? Well, I think the first thing necessary to understand here is that the Ebro is a river in Spain. So we're in Spain, we've got the American, and we've got the girl. We are at a train station, and we are waiting on a train. There's a little bit of not action, not movement, but context, really, here. One of the things that Hemingway said was never confuse movement for action. Here, fortunately, we have neither. But what we do have is what Hemingway is really good at, and that's setting a scene. Whether you like him or not. So in this, what I have here is the, what is this called? The Finca Vigia edition. Can't see it, it's backwards, I know, yell at me, that's fine. The complete short stories of Ernest Hemingway, the Finca Vigia. Finca Vigia? I don't know, Finca Vigia. I'm from the Midwest. Eat some ass, okay? I don't care how it's pronounced. But what we've got here is we've got little breaks between certain sections of stories, like this on page 181, L'Envoi. The king was working in the garden. He seemed very glad to see me. We walked through the garden. This is the queen, he said. She was clipping a rose bush. Oh, how do you do, she said. And we've got just these, between certain sets of short stories, these little, nothing more than scenes being set. I don't know if it is just Hemingway, random clips of Hemingway's writing, or if Hemingway thought he was Ezra Pound for a few days and clipped those out. Whatever it is, that you really, from, I don't know, 150, 200 words at a time, get into a scene as Hemingway builds it. But that's all it is. So I think even people who are disgusted at Ernest Hemingway, and they exist, you know, they get to be themselves, they have their rights, you know, for whatever that's worth. But people who are disgusted at Ernest Hemingway can't deny the scenes that he sets. So we have here the Ebro River, a river in Spain. We're sitting on one side of it, looking across it, and you've got the hills. The hills across the valley of the Ebro were long and white. So what are we looking at there? Symbolically, we're looking at the hills, right? Ups and downs, ups and downs. You have ups and downs of life. Now, We are separated from these hills by the Ebro, a river, running water. If hills represent the ups and downs of life, the river represents leaving the past behind you, moving on with your life. Even if you want to go so far as to say the fresh water is symbolic of washing away one's sins. Running water, symbolic of washing away one's sins, obviously. Fresh water, running water, you're looking pretty much at the same thing, but there is a place in literature for still water. You always have to look out for it. What am I doing here? So what we're looking at, when we're looking at the hills being across the river, is we have an opportunity for our characters here to move past something, to move past some ups and downs. Later in the story, we're going to understand what the ups and downs were, and there's going to be a little bit more irony there than one might care to decipher. But how wonderfully Hemingway is able to get that across so succinctly. The hills across the valley of the Ebro were long and white. That's all he says, and he gives us all the symbolism. Ups and downs of life, we're moving past it. Some of us are moving past it. Some of us really might not be. Moving on from this, we're in Spain. We have the American and the girl. But what are these people doing in Spain? Why are they in Spain? One is American, and the other is the girl. Where's she from? We don't know. In this first paragraph, we have no idea where she's from. She's just called the girl. We can infer from this that she's probably not American. We are inferring, at least, in the very least, that if she is American, she is separate from the American. We have the American and the girl. This language seems to tell us that the girl is of the land. The girl is of the place where they belong. Well, not where they belong, the place where they find themselves. The American is not. The American is the one with special denotation. The American is not, well, obviously, Spanish. So where is she from? Is she of the place where we find ourselves? It's hard to say here. Another thing that we have the ups and downs of life and trying to move past them. Then we have the fact that the American is the American, meaning he's not from here. So we have a little bit of relationship between the two characters there. But what we also have is this phrase here. Now I got to find it. On this side, there was no shade and no trees. So everything is out in the open. No shade and no trees. On this side where we're at, there's no shade and no trees, which is about to be contradicted. Because we're sitting in the shade. Or is it? Is our speaker on the other side of the river? I don't know. I can't tell. This is something that has troubled me every time I have read this short story. I honestly have no idea. If you have a better insight into this very part, be sure to leave it in the comment section below, because I don't know. It says, on this side, there was no shade and no trees. And later on, the American and the girl sat at a table in the shade outside the building. Is our speaker here sitting across from the American and the girl? Across the river from the American and the girl? If not, then Hemingway has herein contradicted himself. Maybe by no shade, what he means is no major shade. No shade large enough to actually break the heat. Either way, by sticking in there the fact that on this side there was no shade, what we're really doing is saying that everything is out in the open. Nothing is hidden. There are ups and downs of life which we are trying to get past. We do have this strange relationship between the two of us, and nothing is hidden. Then, shortly thereafter, we are told it stopped at this junction for 2 minutes and then went on to Madrid. It went on to Madrid, the train. Presumably, at least a character. So, this is very much like Chekhov's gun in the first scene. By the end of this short story, somebody has to get on that train. This sets tension in the story. We have characters, symbolism, tension, and direction, all from this very first paragraph. And if we want a little bit more in the way of symbolism, it was very hot and the express from Barcelona would come in 40 minutes. It was very hot. Very hot like, I don't know, a desert? 40 minutes. 40 minutes lost in the wilderness? 40 minutes lost in the desert? 40 minutes lost in the heat? Kind of like representing 40 years. 40 years lost. So I think that what we're doing here is we're setting up a lot of expectations for Hills Like White Elephants so that it is no real mystery why a short story like Hills Like White Elephants goes on to be so well read, or so widely read, so well known, and incorporates so many things. That's all I have. Get out.